I want to say good morning and welcome you to the Action Forum today. Anyway, I have the pleasure of bringing up Gloria Yeager, who's going to introduce our speaker. Gloria from Fowler Unified.
Good morning, everyone. I have the privilege of introducing Tim Yeager to you. I met Tim for the first time last year. I was on a mission to find someone to support our early education people in our community, our local child care providers. And a colleague said, you might want to talk to Tim Yeager. So I reached out to him with the idea that I was interested in the topic surrounding how we support young children with special needs in a preschool classroom. But during our conversation, what really was remarkable about Mr. Yeager was, here this person is earning a PhD. He's highly regarded in his field. He's had a vast number of experiences, professional experiences, yet he is kid-centric and he has a teacher's heart. And that's what really stood out for me. And when he came to actually visit with our preschool network people, they couldn't write fast enough, and our meeting went way beyond the time it should have. But I want to add a little bit more of his bio for those of you who may not know who he is. Born and raised in Selma, California, Timothy Yeager is an alumnus of Fresno State with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a minor in mathematics. He holds 3 master's degrees from Teachers College of Columbia University in special education, with emphasis in applied behavior analysis, curriculum and instruction, and education. He was also selected as a graduate student to participate in the Federal Policy Institute at Teachers College. He is currently completing his PhD at Columbia University. Timothy has 4 teaching certificates that range from birth through 6th grade for both special and general education, and is a board-certified behavior analyst. With 8 years of professional early childhood experience, he is passionate at bridging the gap towards childhood success by identifying and establishing specific developmental learning milestones necessary for children to learn in an inclusive environment. For the past 2 years, Timothy was the executive director of the Behavioral Sciences Institute and the clinical director of the Autism Center at Fresno State. This fall, he will start a new position as a full-time faculty member within the departments of literacy, early learning, bilingual, and special education in the Crimmins School of Education Human Development at Fresno State. A product of the Central Valley, he is committed to seeing community transformation through investing into the lives of our children. Please welcome Timothy Yeager.
Well, thank you. It's actually a big pleasure and privilege for me to be here. When I was preparing for this talk, I looked back at my statement of purpose for graduate school, and it was about kindergarten readiness in Fresno County. And it was about what we could do to remediate the achievement gap. And so it's kind of a real full circle moment for me. Not supposed to be like that, but it's all right. So 34% of children entering kindergarten in Fresno County are ready for kindergarten. Staggering number. And there's a lot of great effort going on to address this number. I think one really important fact to note is how cool it is and how necessary it is that we have a uniform tool that we're using across multiple school districts to measure kindergarten readiness, so that whatever efforts that we do invest in, we can see what type of outcomes are occurring. Before we jump in, I want to provide some context about my journey here, why kindergarten readiness is really important to me, and the roundabout way that I've got here. In 2007, I returned to college to figure out how I can make a difference in the lives of children. Prior to that, I was a coach. I loved coaching high school basketball, coached at Fowler Unified for Mr. Cedarquist, and really loved the idea of investing and the opportunities that I had to invest in the lives of kids. So I returned to school, I got my degree in psychology, and really fell in love with teaching and education. At that time, I started working at Clovis Unified. I was a paraprofessional at Freedom Elementary School. And I also worked in the Autism Center at Fresno State as an undergrad. During that time, I was studying applied behavior analysis, and for those who don't know, it's a branch of psychology that looks at behavior and more specifically my interest, learning and the science of learning. And it's often correlated with working with children with autism. I learned one thing as an undergrad: I didn't want to work with children with autism. It's a really embarrassing thing for me to say at this time because I've been the director of the Autism Center at Fresno State, but at that time I found it a very punishing experience. Fast forward, I realized that it was punishing because I was just under-equipped and not qualified to work with the children. It wasn't the children at all. So when my faculty recommended that I go to a graduate school and I wanted to study applied behavior analysis, I found one of the few programs that did not work with children with autism, and that was at Teachers College, Columbia University. And my big interest was working with children from low SES homes. At that time, they had student teaching placements in Harlem's Children's Zone, and that was a really big move for me. So I applied, never thought that someone from Selma would get into Columbia, and lo and behold, I got in and moved from Selma with my family all the way across the country and started graduate school. And in graduate school, I had a really intense program that I was really fortunate to be a part of. It's a 2-year residency program where master's students were being trained in the classroom by PhD students of the same program. We'd work full-time, go to school at night from 5 to 10, 4 nights a week for 2 years. And at the end of those 2 years, graduate with those 4 teaching certificates as well as being a board-certified behavior analyst. During my experiences there, I was fortunate to work in a lab school of our program. And lo and behold, it was a preschool for children with autism. And it's kind of weird in that way that it came back to it. However, what was awesome about it was that it was a school for children with autism, but also language delays that was largely represented from children from impoverished homes in the Bronx. And so I got to have a really unique experience to where we were able to develop research, study these interventions that we were applying to children with autism, and how they had this incredible impact on children from poverty. For different reasons, language development from children from low SES homes and children with autism are kind of similar. Much different reasons, one being some type of genetic or physiological difference with children with autism, but with children from poverty, it's often, socially disadvantaged, impoverished language environment. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit. I loved being a teacher, and that's why the introduction meant so much to me, is because in the work that I've been doing, the time that I felt most joy and the time that I felt most at home is when I'd walk into classrooms here. And so I love my opportunities that I had as a teacher. I love being a preschool teacher, and these are just some of the few kids that I was able to work with. So the metaphor that I often use is that in my intense, rigorous program at Columbia, our teachers were eventually PhDs, and so we were scientists in a lot of different ways and trying to study learning, trying to develop interventions that would, in this highly controlled environment, make a really meaningful impact. And I've left Columbia and came back to Fresno thinking, how can I replicate that intense model? And it's very difficult, and I finally came to the point where I don't have to, right? Like, we don't expect all of our general practitioners to be PhD MDs, right? We don't go to the doctor and they don't pull out, a microscope and start doing these type of research to figure out what's the best combination of chemicals that could fix, whatever ailment is. No, we have PhD MDs that do research on science and medicine. They propose what the symptoms are that this tool best fits, and then our medical practitioners, our doctors, utilize that information and then help patients. So that's come to where what my purpose is, and what I'm trying to figure out how I can best meet this area is, how can I be that intermediary? And that's where my passions lie, is being both a teacher and a scientist. How can I bridge that gap between current research that's happening in the field, and how can we make the most meaningful impact in the lives of children. So I returned home. This is my daughter. One of the most important reasons why I came back to Fresno County is my role as a father. But more importantly, Fresno's home. It's not just the place where my daughter lives, it's the place my family lives, and it's the place where I feel most comfortable. I live here in Fresno. I go home to Selma often, and my parents are still here. And the reason I just stress that is that I want to invest in this community because this community has made a big difference in my life. It's given me an opportunity that I'm continuing to be amazed by, and I want to try to figure out how we can provide similar opportunities to as many children as possible. So for the last 2 years, I moved back from New York, and I've worked as the clinical director for the Autism Center at Fresno State. For those who are not familiar with the Autism Center, they provided early intervention services to children with autism from 18 months to 6 years of age. Always our goal was if we can get us a kid by 2 with autism, our goal is to get them into general ed kindergarten class by 5. And I was also the executive director of the administrative organization that oversaw the Autism Center called the Behavioral Sciences Institute. Coming this fall, I decided to make a change. While I really loved my time at the Autism Center, I wanted to see how I could get more involved with school districts. My job at the Autism Center was quite intense and required a lot of time. And when I would meet people in Fowler Unified or in Fresno County who wanted to work together, I just never had the time. And so in communication with the College of Education, I was able to accept a faculty position there that would afford me more opportunities to get involved. But that's just me, and that's not why you're all here. So, some of you, I'm sure most of you have heard about the 30 million word gap, right? It's talked about a lot. That children from professional class families, the differences in language experiences that occur between families that are on welfare, is 30 million words by the age of 4. And this research has really impacted the work that I do, as well as the research that we were doing in graduate school. What people don't know a lot is the background story of this. So Hart and Risley, Betty Hart and Todd Risley in 1995, faculty of Kansas University, initially sought out to how can we address the achievement gap that existed by, as faculty, as doctors of education, teaching preschool. Can they catch up kids? So they went into the classroom, and for a year, they used all the best methods of teaching that they could do to try to catch these kids up. And after a year, they didn't. That's pretty outstanding in itself. The takeaway for me is, at times, great teaching isn't enough. And so they spent the next 10 years trying to figure out what type of language experiences happen in the home, right? And so they selected a large number of families. They went into the home an hour a week and measured those types of language experiences. After 10 years of coding that data, this is what they came up with, was 30 million words. And this work has led to a lot of great initiatives that are being done to try to address these types of language experiences. 2 quotes, I should back up, 2 quotes that that took away from their work. Is we found we could easily increase the size of a children's vocabulary by teaching them new words, but we could not accelerate the rate of vocabulary growth so that it would continue beyond direct teaching. We could not change the developmental trajectory. So they were already behind, and they would stay behind. They also said, however many new words we taught the children in preschool, it was clear that a year later, when the children were in kindergarten, the effects of the boost in vocabulary resources would have washed out. Those are sobering words, for especially someone in education where we believe in the power of great teaching. And so initiatives like Talk, Read, Sing is an initiative that's trying to address this problem, right? So we look at how can we provide these necessary language experiences in the home that can lead to this type of vocabulary growth and get these children ready. And there's many of initiatives like this. And while this is a great initiative and it's a great cause to be a part of, The question that I've always tried to figure out is, well, what if they still get to kindergarten and they're not ready? What if they get to preschool and they're not ready? Because oftentimes, language experience in the home is not a function of a parent not knowing or not wanting to talk. There's a whole lot of other factors that play, right? And one of the things that we need to be wary of is it doesn't matter when that kid's in kindergarten, we have to try to figure out how can we catch them up, right? There's no use in blaming whatever demographic factors contributed that kid's lack of vocabulary. And so this research spurred on my faculty advisor at Columbia, Dr. Douglas Greer, into figuring out what else is missed as a result of them not gaining vocabulary, right? These 30 million words is not just a matter of them learning what an elephant is, right? It's having a larger impact on their learning. So, knowing that good teaching is not enough, and knowing that they are missing more than vocabulary, what is it that they're missing? And so, what is it that those experiences actually develop in how they learn? Which, in a lot of ways, is the trim tab that Linda talked about. Like, what are these key developmental learning capabilities that they acquire kids acquire naturally as a result of their experiences that set the trajectory of their learning, right? And so, as researchers and as teachers, how can we figure out what those are? And if that's not in place, what can we do in education to address those? And so this is when my faculty advisor, Dr. Greer, has set out he's been a faculty there for 40 years, but more specifically the last 15 years, like, what are these measures? What can we do? How can we change the course in a very dramatic way? And so 2 of the ones that I want to talk to you today are naming and observational learning. There's a lot of them that he has addressed and been published on, but to me, these are 2 of the most important ones that when we're looking at early childhood and kindergarten readiness that we need to talk about. So naming. It's been used, and the term is so generic, and I wish that it wasn't called naming. And in my dissertation, I proposed that we should call it incidental language acquisition. And so it's the ability to acquire language as a result of everyday experiences and not being directly taught. So if a parent's at the zoo walking down, the aisleway and says, hey, look, that's an elephant. From that one experience, a child in the age of 2 to 3 that's had enough language experiences up until that point will learn it, right? So when they see it on TV, they say, hey, Mom, that's an elephant. Or, Mom can say, hey, go to your room and get your toy elephant. And they can go get that elephant. All stemming from that one experience. This is what accounts for the language explosion that naturally happens with typically developing kids from middle-class families and above, to where between the ages of 2 and 3, vocabulary just takes off, right? So these are the types of experiences that kids need to be able to learn from in order to build up the necessary vocabulary to be successful in kindergarten, but also it addresses rate of learning, right? So after enough types of language experiences, a child from one experience can learn the name, which is so incredibly important, because when you get into kindergarten, 1st grade, and as the Common Core State Standards require us to address academics so early, kids need to learn things quick, right? And in those 30 million words that are missed out are often the necessary experiences to get kids to learn as quick as they need to learn. So naming, it's the ability to learn language incidentally. We've talked about this. We've had published reports that have shown that if a child didn't possess this capability, we have an intervention that we would do to establish this capability, and then children would learn 4 to 7 times faster as a result of that intervention. What I found most exciting about the work of my faculty advisor is that it's not a developmental, theory like many developmental theories, where it's like, here are these stages. Here are specific learning capabilities, and if they're not present, here are teacher interventions that can be done to put these things in place. It's not a matter of waiting for this to happen or waiting for certain experiences to occur in the home. It's, this kid's here, he's 5, he needs to learn this way. What can we do in a more intense type of intervention? Also, I just want to speak about, when we talk about reading comprehension, these types of experiences are necessary for reading comprehension to actually occur. So when you're thinking about that elephant, that experience, that child doesn't only see elephant, he smells an elephant, he gets understanding of the texture, the skin of the elephant, the surrounding sounds that were there. And so when he reads the word elephant, with this learning capability, he sees it, he remembers what it smells like, and that brings about a more vivid picture when the child's reading the story, which leads to reading comprehension. We also have had published articles on how pre and post this type of intervention, children's reading comprehension scores increase dramatically. And so, just to talk a little bit more about this, the aha moment for me in graduate school was we were doing this research with children with autism. Children with autism, for whatever genetic reasons, often live in an environment that's much smaller than everyone else's environment. They attend to things that may be important to them, but they're not what's actually occurring in the environment. And so those language experiences that are happening in their room aren't really having an impact on their life, right? And so very similarly, whereas they're not being impacted by those language experiences, children from poverty oftentimes, and I always want to make sure that poverty is not the cause, and I'm not saying that all children from poverty lack these types of experiences, but overall. Well, those language experiences aren't happening. And so in our preschool classes, we started to run these interventions with a much wider range of children and started to see some much more dramatic results, which is a really powerful thing for me, and I get chills thinking about when you run these type of teaching interventions with kids that don't have any genetic factors that are actually prohibiting them from learning. All kids can learn. The types of growth that occurs is pretty powerful. The other one is observational learning, which is a really important thing on a couple of different levels. And that we break that up, a child's ability to learn through observation and a child's ability to do something while observing. This is really important in kindergarten when oftentimes in preschool kids come from not being part of group environments and then having to go into a classroom and participate as a group and learn in a group. So, early childhood ed, you have a group of kids, you call a child out and say, hey, what is this? It's a globe. Well, oftentimes teachers assume that by calling one child out and having some type of teaching interaction with them, that all children will learn from that. That's not the case oftentimes if a child doesn't learn through observation. I have a colleague in New Orleans that is showing that children all the way up to 4th grade some of these children aren't learning through that way. So what happens then? They get to kindergarten. At that point, maybe they don't know what they need to know in kindergarten, so they're not ready. But then they're not making the most of the opportunities that are occurring in kindergarten, so they continue to fall behind. Then you might start seeing kids that have behavioral issues where they're acting out. They're trying to seek attention in different ways because they're not accessing the curriculum that they should be. Other one, all of you guys, I'm sure, can identify with this and being in a group setting like this, and a direction was given and you didn't hear it, right? Exactly. But by looking at your peers and colleagues, you can figure out what the direction was and you can follow it, right? This is really important because this happens quite a bit in class. It actually may be that the kid's not being a bad kid or not, being disobedient. He just doesn't have the skills necessary to always be listening to you, and when he's not listening to you, follow your direction by observing his peers. What's important to note about all three of these things is that the published literature shows assessments that can be done to measure if kids can learn language incidentally, can learn language through observation, and can do by observation, but also has interventions that teachers can do to address those and put those in place. And so these three things that I presented to you aren't three things that are really on the radar of early childhood ed and kindergarten readiness. And I'm not proposing that these are the end-all, be-all of what children need, but I do think that these two capabilities that I've outlined really set a foundation for kids to be successful in kindergarten. And this analogy, the trim tab, and the metaphors is quite powerful in the sense that it sets the child in course for that. They're learning on course for that direction of being successful in early childhood ed. Since I have all you here, I wanted to talk to you about some key observations that I've had in the last 2 years since coming back to Fresno. As the director of the Autism Center at Fresno State, I had the distinct privilege of being in a lot of different classrooms, a lot of different school districts. And I just want to share those with you guys. One of the most frustrating types of experiences that we could have at the Autism Center was we're providing quality service to a child, ages 2 to 5, right in that preschool and kindergarten range, and teachers are providing quality service. Kids go to preschool for 15 hours a week, they come to the Autism Center for 15 hours a week, and it's not a cohesive program, right? So kids, and this is happening to kids in autism across the board, not just the center. Children are receiving early intervention services, and so they go to preschool, then they go to an in-home provider, or they go to a center-based program, and oftentimes they might be working on the same goals, but working on it in a really different way. I think that's a problem. And in the state of New York, early intervention services are provided through the school districts. They're overseen by teachers and board-certified behavior analysts, so it's a much more cohesive program. We also experience a lot of transportation issues in our field. So I have kids that have parents who are commuting 4 hours a day by bus to take their kid to the Autism Center, drop them off, ride the bus back home, come back to the Autism Center, pick them up. That's 2 hours a day that the child's commuting, right? And we talk about all the factors that are contributing to certain deficits in early childhood ed. These parents are being asked a lot. There's also, I've faced issues with scaling the type of service that we're providing. One of the most heartbreaking things as the director of the Autism Center was to see how services for children with autism were disproportionately provided to children from middle-class families and above, and children from Spanish-speaking homes and children from poverty often weren't accessing these services despite these services being free. If you look in West Fresno County, it's not that there aren't children with autism out there or children with language delays. There's just not services available out there. There's an interesting trend of late. There's an insurance mandate that all insurance companies are required to provide services for children with autism. And Medi-Cal now is covering these services, which I think may provide an interesting opportunity for school districts to tap into Medi-Cal funds to maybe address some of the concerns that I talked about with respect to providing a cohesive program, increasing scale. Just if you're interested in numbers, Calviva pays $44 per hour per child per paraprofessional, which ends up being quite a bit of money. Also, I've been talking to a number of principals that have concerns about arising behavioral issues that are occurring and not having adequate staff. School districts are asking a lot of school psychologists, and one of those is oftentimes being the behavior intervention team, and from what I've been gathering, they continue to need extra help in that regards. So my questions to you, and in conclusion, how might we, you guys are all educational leaders and decision makers, how might we leverage existing early education programs to maybe address these two learning capabilities? And how could we get in there and assess and put it in place and see what type of outcomes that we can have with our children? Might we consider how to tap into current Medi-Cal reimbursements for children with autism to provide a cohesive program for these children, addressing issues with access as well as transportation? And to me, what would be most exciting is how can we tap into those funds, use those funds for those services, but also use those funds to develop and train teaching assistants in a different way that could have a more meaningful impact, not just with children in special ed, but children that are the demographics that we've been talking about with respect to not having those language experiences. I think I talked about earlier, was a paraprofessional at Clovis Unified. That's where I started as a teaching assistant. And if you're in special ed, you know that we depend a lot on paraprofessionals. They do a lot of work, especially in these classrooms that have a high number of paraprofessionals working with a 1-to-1 ratio or 2-to-1 ratio. And we also know that developing those paraprofessionals and teachers in those moments pays off tremendously. We also ask special education teachers to not only be teachers, but be managers of staff, and professional development's needed in that area. My other question is, how might we develop a pre-K pilot program that addresses these learning capabilities and see how we could make a meaningful difference in the lives of these kids? And lastly, what could it look like if all of our students were ready to learn by the end of kindergarten? All right. Well, thank you.